to start my bowl cap, I cut behind the ears first and then work it around the ear just to make sure that the hole doesn't get too big. And then once you have both ears cut out, you take your lace glue and then you can start to apply that around your bowl cap. So I like to use lace glue before I use any spray because I feel like it's easier when you use the glue and then you spray behind whatever the glue has there. So you can see in the video, I put the glue first and then I sprayed the Eben spray. Then I go in with the lace tin or the lace spray. That's also from Eben. And you guys can see I don't cut the entire bowl cap. I cut behind the flap and then cut the ears and then I use that to secure the back part. I feel like that's so much easier than sewing it. And then once you do that, I just go in with some scissors and I cut off all the excess bowl cap that wasn't glued down. And then I use some of my bronzer just to color the parts of the cap that didn't get any of the spray. I like to use powder rather than liquid because I feel like liquid just gets too messy, and with powder it's easier to control. Then just use some alcohol to clean up any of the extra bronzer that's on your face. This was the wig. This was a 32-inch wig, but to be honest, it was given like 28-inch or 30-inch. I don't know. But I bleached it. I did a light plucking, but you guys are going to see I plucked it again after that. And then I sprayed the same spray I used on my cap in the wig. That spray is also from Even. I'm gonna link all the products down below. And before I even put any glue, I like to try the wig on to make sure that it fits and everything is fine. And you guys can see I was just going in doing a really light plucking. And every time you pluck, just make sure you comb out whatever hair that you pluck. So I used the comb to follow back. Then I used a wax stick. And I'm just making sure that the hair isn't in the way when I am ready to lay the wig down. So I pulled the beginning of the lace back, and this is where I start to apply my glue. So I put the glue right on the cap, and then I like to spread it out around an inch thick just to make sure that your wig doesn't fall off. If you're doing like a really thin line, even if you're putting a lot of glue, it's not gonna hold. So I like to do thin layers. So I do like 4 or 3 thin layers, but I just make sure that I'm spreading it out a really good amount so that the wig could stay on. So for this, I like to use a popsicle stick because I feel like that's the easiest way to make sure that there's no air bubbles and stuff like that. Because if you have really thick globs of like glue in some areas, and then some areas are spread it out really thin, it's not gonna look right. Once you put your wig down, it's gonna be all bubbly underneath the lace. So just make sure that before it even starts to dry, you spread it out to the point where it's really thin. Like after you're done spreading out, it already starts to dry because you're putting it so thin. If you gotta remove some of the glue, you can do that just to make sure that there's no thick bubbles of glue. So once the glue dries, in order to put the wig on, I always like to make sure that the wig is going to be either directly on top of the glue or a little bit in front of the glue, just because when the wig is behind the glue, it's so hard to take off with alcohol and it gets really messy and then the lace starts lifting. So just try to make sure that you're actually looking at where the wig is going on the glue and that it's not behind it. So every time I lay aside, I just use my comb to make sure that it's really melted in. And then I go in with my hot comb again just to make sure that all the hair is back and everything is neat. And I use my elastic band and I keep that on for like 10 to 15 minutes. I didn't spray any spray at this point. I'm just melting it with the lace glue. So once I take it off, you should have something like this. It was given. And to cut the lace, I cut a line straight through the middle. Then I go side by side. So you can see every time I'm going to cut something, I don't just cut it. I always make sure that I'm not cutting off something that I wanted to keep. Like everything looks fine. So as you're cutting, just lift up the lace to make sure that you understand what's going to get cut off. Because once you cut it, you can't put it back on. I go back in and cut off any small little pieces of lace that I want to get rid of. It's okay to have a little bit of lace, but too much is going to start to get cakey and white. So try to cut off as much as you can. when I'm cutting off my ear flaps, it's really simple. Once you cut off that main part like I did, cut it in half first and then go side by side. It's really easy to do the ear flaps. And if you missed any spots with some glue, you can just go in and touch it up with it, like just like how I did. It's okay if you miss some spots. So here we're gonna start to do some plucking and some styling now that the wig is on. So you guys are gonna see that pieces of the lace is lifting up, but once I'm doing the edges, that's when I take care of all that extra stuff. So for right now, I knew that I wanted to do a middle part, so I part my hair down the middle. I'm combing it to make sure that everything is neat and uniformed. And then this is when I start to section out my baby hairs. I like big dramatic baby hairs, so it's always gonna be two big C's on each side. So you guys can see I go in with the comb, section out like a C, and I needed to do a lot of plucking. So I went in with my tweezer and I just started plucking away. So before I even plucked the edges, I wanted to pluck the beginning of the wig. So I knew I wanted a widow's peak. That's why I left that middle section where the part is, and I'm plucking where I know I want the edges to be, because I don't want the edge to be too thick even though I want it to be dramatic. Okay, so at this point I had done the other side and I had sprayed a little bit more even to lay any of the lace that was flapping up, and we're just gonna focus on this side since this is the side you guys are gonna see anyway. So this was me just cleaning up the parts and making sure that the hair that I want to be in the edge is all out, and I went in with my hot comb that stopped working. But I basically wanted to make sure that everything was in the place that it was supposed to be. So once you section out your edges, you want to make sure that you're going in with your tweezer and you're plucking in between the edge and the hair to make sure that the widow's peak is prominent, like you want it to be seen. So do a good amount of plucking. Like this wig needed to be plucked a lot. The lace was a little thick, the frontal was a little thick. So I even had to part the edge in half and pluck in between that just to make it easier. So this is me plucking it. I'm making sure that I'm removing all the hair that's plucking, because I didn't want it to be bald. So I plucked that part and then I'm gonna put down the other top part and pluck that part, and this is what I did for both sides. And then I think the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. I always cut my edges really long because if you got a short edge, that's real scary. So it's rather to cut it long and then cut it to adjust to what you need. So I cut it long. I use Gorilla Snot. That's the only thing I use for my edges. And then I start to form them. At first I was gonna do some straight hair, and I was like, you know what, let me give myself some crimps. I didn't really want hard crunchy crimps. I wanted something that was soft, that almost gave like wet and wavy. So after I crimped it, spent all that time crimping it, I ended up combing them out. But it still gave like beach wave, so you could tell it was crimped, but it just was really soft. So I didn't use any hard spray. I used Sebastian's hairspray instead of like Eben or Got to Be, because I wanted something really light. So this was the final look. I hope it helped anybody who was curious or like never installed a wig before. It can be a little tedious, but I feel like once you start practicing, you'll eventually get it over time. Let me know what videos you guys want to see next. Bye.